Did you guys get to yesterday?
We are holding by the Esvei on Chav Zayin Amud Beis.
I said, I don't have time. I'm working 18 hours straight. You said, there's no movement today. You said, it's a whole chef, there's no movement. And I was here the next day.
Okay, one sec. We can talk about this a different time. Different neshamas have different. Okay, today's daf is daf Chav Ches. We are picking up from Chav Zayin Amud Beis. I want to give some context. At the end of today's daf, if we get to it, I'm hoping we do get to it. I would love to get to the Mishnah. Do you remember the Gemara on daf Tes Amud Beis? That was the Gemara with the very big, huge, long Rashi that had all of the 15 different ways to have the Mishnah from daf Beis and the Mishnah daf Chav. So on Chav Ches Amud Beis, we have a repeat of that Gemara. So on the one hand, it's a repeat. So maybe we can slide through it a little faster. It actually goes through it in more detail. But it's complicated. So, I don't want to just dive in it like a minion factor. I want to learn it, but at the same time, so it's challenging. But, so we'll try to see how, we might get through halfway, and I might just say we're starting from the Mishnah tomorrow.
It goes through the Gemara from which one?
From the big one, Tes Amud Beis, the one we discussed the other day. Yeah. Okay, we're in the middle of a machlekes between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, we're gonna set it up so everyone's on the same page. So Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are like this. Remember, we're coming off of the Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? We have the Mishnah where there's 4 brothers. Reuven and Shimon passed away, left over Rachel and Leah. You have Levi and Yehuda. There are 2 brothers. And there's an issue. It says in the Mishnah, they cannot do Yibum. Why? So we saw 2 reasons so far in the Gemara. One reason is because of Achos Kukasai. Each one of them are quasi-married to both. Therefore, each one has a sister as the sister of my wife, basically. Yeah, that's Achos Kukasai, which is only going to be a problem if you hold Yesh Zika. And even if you hold Ein Zika, the way we explained the Mishnah was, there's an Isser to be Mevatel Mitzvah Yibum. So if I do Yibum with one of the sisters, the second sister now, I don't have to do it. My brother can do it. What if the brother dies? So the Gemara says there's a chiddush in both cases. The chiddush in the Zika side is that you even say Yesh Zika when there are 2 Yevamos, two left over, even though it's a weaker Zika. We still call that enough that it's a problem of Achos Kukaso. And the chiddush in Isser Levatel Mitzvah Yevamin and 4 brothers, we said is that even though the only 2 brothers left over, even though the only way you get to a problem of Mitzvah Spittel Yibum is by being concerned that maybe the second brother is going to die, which is, let's be honest, unlikely. I mean, we're already saying 2 brothers died. Now we're saying a 3rd brother died. But that Chaysh Levisa is something that if you hold Ein Zika, you'll have to come on to it to explain the Mishnah. So again, we have the Mishnah, 4 brothers, 2 died, left over Levi and Yehuda with a mitzvah to do Yibum with Rachel and Leah. They're sisters. So either because of Achas Kukase or because mitzvah, Asr Levatel Mitzvahs Yibumin, it's Asr Levatel Yibum. Either way, you're going to have an explanation for why the din of the Mishnah is Choltzos v'lo Misyadmos. Now, that's
my friend is in court right now in Israel. So
he needs a twist. Learning it should be learned. In his what's his name? Do you have his Hebrew name or?
His name is Chaim Donut. I don't know his father's
I know
name.
Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy.
Chaim Donut. Yeah, it's divorce related. It's
no, divorce. Thank God, is already settled. Now he's dealing with his mother's apartment thing with trustee.
Okay. You should be zoich to have Hashem should give him this person.
Thank you.
The mechamas that he's fought in his life, unbelievable. And where he's come from.
His wife just left the apartment. The court gave the get already. They ordered the get for June 1st. It's the last thing.
Okay. You should have Yeshua's.
Amen.
Chaim Donut, Jimmy.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
When I was in Eish Torah, he was in Eish Torah. When I was learning Kol. Okay. So that's the din of the Mishnah. Then we saw Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. What are Rav and Rabbi Yochanan arguing on? They're arguing in a very similar case. I'll draw it up in a minute when we go through the Gemara, but I just want to speak it out in a more intimate fashion. 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven and Shimon are married to sisters. So far it's very similar. It's just that Yehuda is not around. Yeah. Now, instead of saying that Reuven and Shimon die, leaving over Levi and Yehuda, and the question is, what do they do with both of these sisters? The case of that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing over is what happens if after Reuven and Shimon die, you now have Rachel and Leah falling to Levi. Now, Levi, theoretically speaking, at this very moment, he has a mitzvah even with both of them. So far, everything's the same. But we haven't discussed the following point, which is it sort of does really matter, at least according to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, which one of Reuven and Shimon die first. Because whichever one of Reuven and Shimon die first, their wife becomes a Yevama first. Now, why does that matter? Because Rav and Rabbi Yochanan discussed the following concept. What happens if, when someone falls Yibum, in that moment, she's usher to do Yibum, but something occurs after to now make her okay to do Yibum, right? Meaning, I don't mean min haTorah. I'm not talking about she's an erva. You can't make an erva go away. I'm talking about the Rabbanan. Meaning, if let's say a woman, let's use the case of our Mishnah. Let's say if all of the sudden, this isn't the case of our Mishnah. Let's say all of the sudden after Rachel and Leah fall to Yibam to Levi and Yehuda, Rachel died. Well, now all of a sudden there's no Zika anymore. There's no problem of mitzvah, asal batal mitzvah Yibam, and there's only one woman, just do the Yibam. Right, so one would theoretically say you should be able to do Yibam there, right? So the Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are having a machlekes about that exact scenario. What happens if one of the sisters dies? Now, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are going to argue over the order in which they die, right? Meaning, let's say in all of our cases, Reuben will be the first one dying, and he was married to Rachel. So that means Rachel was the first Yevam. So that means before Shimon died, in that very moment, Rachel was the only Yevama, and since Rachel was the only Yevama, Reuben, Levi or Yehuda, or sorry, in the case of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, it's just Levi. Levi could do even with Rachel, nothing to talk about, 100% cloud kosher, no questions asked. Now Shimon dies. Now Leah, the sister of the one he's already skuka to, or the woman that you have to be concerned that if you do Yibam to one, you're mevatel the mitzvah Yibam of the other. I'm just going to continue talking on the tzad of skuka, just because it's annoying to have to repeat it both times. The reason why I'm repeating it is because in the Gemara it's going to come up, so I don't want to have to side check you guys later. I want it to be something that we're sort of having on the way in. So Reuven and Shimon are dying. Reuven dies first. Rachel falls first. Then Shimon dies. Now Leah falls. So if Leah's falling now, well, Leah is achos kukaso, because Rachel's already skuka. So says Rav and Rabbi Yochanan the following thing. What happens if one of them now die? Well, now l'chayra, if one of them dies from achos kukaso, the Zika has gone away. So says Rav, no matter which way you go, you can go ahead and do Yibam. Rav says, once, let's say, Leah dies, you could do Yibam with Rachel, because there's no longer Achas Kukasai. Once Rachel dies, you could do Yibam with Leah, because no longer Achas Kukasai. Says Rabbi Yochanan, I agree with you that you could do Yibam when Leah dies, and Rachel is the one who is surviving, because when Rachel became a Yevama, you were allowed to do Yibam with her. There was never a moment when she became a Yevama that you couldn't do it. There was a temporary problem when Shimon died and Leah was now your Achos Kukaso. In that moment, they sort of created problems for each other. But when Leah then died, well, the temporary problem went away. It goes back to its original status, which was when Leah became a Yevama, she was completely mutter to do Yibum. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, right? He says, therefore, I completely agree with that. But what happens if it goes the other way? What happens if Rachel dies? Says Rabbi Yochanan, well, if Rachel's the one who's dying, she was the one who, when she fell, was mutter to you. Leah never had a moment of heter with you. The second Leah became your Yevama. The second Shimon died. Who was Leah? The sister of your Yevama. The sister of your Kukasei, let's say. Yeah? So that means you couldn't have done Yibum with her from the very moment she became a Yevama. Now Rachel dies. Okay, so you're right. She's no longer Achas Kukasei. Says Rabbi Yochanan, he has a klal, a rule, that once B'shas Nefila, the woman becomes usher to you, that issur doesn't go away. So effectively, what Rav and Rabbi Yochanan are arguing in is what happens when Leah dies. Sorry, take that back. What happens when Rachel dies and Leah, who never, when she fell, was mutter? Do we say that in the end of the day, Rachel's taking care of the Zika, so therefore it's no longer Achas Kukaso? That's the opinion of Rav. Whereas the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, which is who we're going to be focusing on today, is he says that once Leah dies, Rachel's fine. But once Rachel dies, it doesn't help Leah. Leah was us in the moment she fell to Yibum Yibum. That doesn't get fixed. Now, again, just to point out, there's a logic to what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. Rabbi Yochanan is saying it's very similar to the way we talk about a woman who falls Yibum. Let's say a brother dies and has a child. And at that moment, there's no Yibum. And then 3 minutes after he dies, the son dies. The son who was, when alive, made it that there's no mitzvah Yibum is now gone. So do we say, okay, now there's a mitzvah Yibum? No, we say at the moment when the brother died, that's all we care about. We've spoken about this 3 or 4 times already. The moment of death is effectively all we care about. Many different discussions that it came up with where the moment of death is what matters. So Rabbi Yochanan has there's an argument to support what he's saying, which is that argument. He's saying if at the moment when Shimon dies, Leah, who's falling to Levi, is also do Yibum because of Rachel, because of Achas Kukaso, well, okay, that status remains with her no matter what now. Rav has a good argument, though, and the argument is that, let's say, what's the reason why I'm not allowed to marry Achos Kukaso? Because it's like Achos Ishtoi. Achos Ishtoi is mutter as soon as the wife dies, no matter when. right? Meaning, so what? All of a sudden, the Isur Achos Kukasar is going to be frummer than Achos Isha? So there's an argument to be made that you could see here that if the whole reason why I'm ushered this woman is only because it's like my Achos Isha, as soon as the wife dies, you mutter to the sister no matter what.
It's the only one, right? You said that.
The only Ereva.
one.
It's uniquely that way. So if this is modeled after that, it should follow that same path, which is, who cares that it happened after the Nifil? So you can hear the discussion. That's not for our discussion today. That's the Eon of yesterday's stuff. But Rabbi Yochanan says, no. Once Leah falls and she's ushered in Yibam, the fact that Rachel now dies does not fix anything. Okay.
It's also like Achshel Yevamos.
It's very similar. Yeah, it's a very similar concept. Similar concept. Once it happens, now, it is still only an Issa D'Rabbanan. We saw yesterday that Rav does agree to the concept by a Daraisa, but we're not going to have that discussion now. For the Rabbanans, Rav argues that it shouldn't apply, and therefore, says the Gemara, and Rabbi Yochanan is going to hold, you cannot do Yibam with Leah if Rachel dies. Correct. Choltzos for Lo Misyamos is in the Mishnah, and in their case, the halacha is that the only the din is going to be Chalitza, unless the one who dies first is Leah, in which case then you could do Yibam with Rachel. And again, there's two homes there. There's the house of Reuben, there's the house of Shimon, so they both need a fix. Okay. We're picking up from Esvei, and we're asking from here to the two dots on Chavches. We're addressing Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. We're going to ask a question that, if you think about it, can also be asked on Rav, but the Gemara is not going to address it. So in order to keep the Gemara moving, I'm not going to address it either. But just, if your brain is like, I don't get it, why are we asking Rabbi Yochanan? It can also be asked on Rav. The Gemara just happens to be focused on Rabbi Yochanan because that's the discussion. Says the Gemara, Esvei, and just one more word of Hakdama. The question is going to be on Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah, and I'm going to draw it because it'll be easier to see. The question is going to come from our Mishnah. The Gemara is going to say that Rabbi Yochanan says our Mishnah is not a good Mishnah, meaning he says it's not to be relied upon. He says it must have been taught as a mistake. Whoa. And the Gemara then tries to go through, like, I don't even know, 7 or 8 different answers Rabbi Yochanan could have given to explain the Mishnah and yet not be a problem with his opinion. And the Gemara is going to explain in each one of them why he didn't like that suggestion, so that in the Maskani he's going to say that's why I didn't like the Mishnah. To the two dots. And then we'll pick up from the two dots. Wow. Okay. Esvei. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is if that Leah dies first, you could do Yibam with Rachel. If Rachel dies first, you can't do Yibam with Leah. Esvei Rabbi Yochanan, and this is what I meant. If the question is coming to Rabbi Yochanan, so that's why the question was asked to him. They were dialoguing. They asked him, Rabbi Yochanan, in your opinion, what do you do with the Mishnah of Chavav and Yevamos? Arba Achen, Beis Mehem Nesuas Beis Achis. The Mishnah that we learned 2 days ago. What does the Mishnah say? Umeisu hanesuin esa achios. Reuven and Shimon die. Levi and Yehuda have Yibam with Rachel and Leah. Harei Elu, these two ladies, Rachel and Leah, who are achos kukatze to each other, or problem of bittul Yibam. Harei Elu choltos lo misyabmos. Each one for their reasons. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, this is very difficult. V'amai. Really, what's the difference between death or chalitza? I mean, all we're doing, what is it about Rachel or Leah dying in the Machlokes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan? What is it accomplishing? Zika's over. Meaning, if achos kukaso or bittul mitzvahs yibam is the problem, you get rid of the second sister, then everything is hanky-dory, right? Meaning, what's the difference if you're getting rid of it through death or you're getting rid of it through chalitza? So why is it choltzois? Why is it that they both got to do chalitza in our Mishnah? Why not say that the first brother, whichever one it is, does chalitza with the first sister, one of the sisters, and now Yibam should be mutter with the second sister.
Who chooses? How does that work, though?
Whichever one goes first.
The one of them could die.
Right, so no. So and that's only with Yibam, right? Because he could do chalitza to both. Meaning bittul mitzvahs Yibam is only if you do Yibam to the first. If you do chalitza to the first, you could do chalitza to the second. There's nothing wrong with doing chalitza to 2 ladies from 2 different homes.
That's because it's a weak bond, right?
No, it's a different discussion. I'm saying much simpler here.
Why is it achas kukasa?
So what if it's achas kukasa? You still got it. She still has. It's only the Rabbanon. Minat Torah. That's a secret.
No, like, maybe that's why you can't do even. You already do chalitza.
Achos kukaso if he does it himself.
Right,
why can't the other brother?
Chalitza with one and then do even with the other one is the question.
Meaning for the other brother.
Right, the other brother. Yeah.
Right, because in our Mishnah,
right?
So Levi does, let's say, Yibam chalitza with Rachel, and let Yehuda do Yibam with Leah. What's the problem? Why can't Yehuda do it? Why? Because it's achos kukasei. So now Rabbi Yochanan will say, I understand why that din would be true if the one who you did chalitza with was Rachel, because I'll agree when you get rid of Rachel, Leah is still a problem. Because Leah, remember, she's the one who never was mutter. Again, making the assumption in the Mishnah that Reuven was the one who died first, right? So, but it doesn't say cholzos when it does this way. It's mashma no matter what. Everyone gets chalitza. So let's get this again. I think it might help to draw. So let's. I'm gonna just quickly draw the machlokes of Rav and Yochanan, which was Reuven, Shimon,
Sign in front of you now.
Levi,
No, just let's shake the hands.
Rachel, and Leah, right? So Rav and Rabbi Yochanan said, we're going with Rabbi Yochanan. We don't even need to talk about Rav now. Rabbi Yochanan said the following: since he died first, he died second, Rachel fell first. So just for working as a timeline, if I'm fast forwarding, when Reuven died, what did we say? Rachel is completely fine with Levi, because right now Leah is still married to Shimon, and Shimon's, living. It's fine.
Your three brothers, right?
Three brothers: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and two sisters.
Yep.
So now, when Reuven dies, Rachel's the only Yevama, so Levi could do Yevama with Rachel. Nothing to talk about. No problem. Completely kosher for Yosha. Nothing to talk about. Now Shimon dies before Levi does anything with Rachel, and now he has two Yevamas. Now they're both problematic because of Achas Kukaso. But says Rabbi Yochanan, this woman is much better off. Why? Because if Leah were to die, this is exactly what Rabbi Yochanan says, if Leah dies, then Levi could do Yibum with Rachel again. Because since Rachel was at first okay, this is really only a temporary problem. But let's say Rachel dies. If Rachel dies, then Leah, who was never mutter to begin with, is problematic to Levi. Because even when she fell, she was problematic. So the fact that Rachel is dying and taking away the Zika problem, yeah, technically you're taking away what caused the stain, but the shirt stains. Nothing you could do about it. So therefore, it says Rabbi Yochanan, Levi cannot do even with Leah, but must do chalitza. This is Rabbi Yochanan. I mean, it's really Rav also. I'm saying this is a machlekes Rav Minuch, but what we need is Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is that Leah is going to be, once she's usher forever, right? But what's the halacha in the opposite direction? I just want to, I'm sorry, it's messy. Right, you have Reuven, Shimon, Rachel, and Leah. And we said that Rabbi Yochanan would hold, when can you do Yibum? As long as Leah is the one who's dying, then this Yibum here is mutter.
Essentially saying she's the cause of the problem. She's gone.
Yeah, but the important factor is that the order of when they died, right, matters. Because since Reuven died first, Rachel started as a completely normal, perfect Yevama. Leah was never a perfect normal Yevama. She only became okay when Rachel died. Right. So since, in that case, Leah is always going to be a problem. So I'm saying it now. So in the Mishnah, which I'm going to draw in a second, Leah needing chalitza makes a ton of sense. Meaning if, let's say, you went ahead and did chalitza with Rachel, you still need to do chalitza with Leah, because Leah was problematic to start with. Let's see it over here. What does our Mishnah say? Very similar. What's the case? You have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, right? Rachel, Leah, very similar case, right? So what does it say in the Mishnah? It says cholzos. No Yibum
right,
at all. That's a key point. There's
no
nothing,
matter what happens.
no matter what. It says in the Mishnah, Cholzos v'lo misyabmos, very specific. Cholzos, misyabmos. So now, let's assume again, someone had to die first. I'm just going to be picking Reuven. Yeah, Reuven, and he died second.
We don't care about leaving Yehuda for purpose of this illustration.
No, we do. I'll show you.
I'm thinking we're dying.
No. They're going to be the ones doing the mitzvah.
Got it. Right. Got
So
it.
it says like this. So now, Reuven dies first. So that means really we have the same sequence of events. Rachel is falling first. Levi and Yehuda can do Yibum with Rachel. Nothing to talk about. Kosher v'yosher. Flat kosher Yibum. So instead of talking about death, let's talk about chalitza. So let's say Yehuda does chalitza with Leah.
Shimon died first.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's fine.
Meaning he died first, and then he died.
Why are there four brothers here?
That's the case.
That's the case of our Mishnah.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, it's a very good question. There could be three brothers, and the din of our Mishnah that was discussed yesterday. There's a chiddush in four, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. Okay, so here he does chalitza. So let's say he does chalitza with Leah. So here you're talking about death, but here we're talking about chalitza. So no one's dying; they're alive, but the zika's gone now. And then the whole reason why you couldn't do yibum with Rachel was because of achas kukaso. Well, doesn't this take care of that? Just like this takes care of it, says Rabbi Yochanan, and now Rachel is mutter in yibum for Levi. Why can't Levi do yibum with her? Now, what do you mean, no yibum? This is the question the Gemara is about to ask. Eisvei, Rabbi Yochanan, how come I'm allowed to do yibum with Rachel? Because Leah died, and Leah was the second one to fall, so this woman is like just reverting back to her original status. Well, Rachel also started as the first Yevama. She only became Osir when Leah became a Yevama because of Achas Kukaso. Well, he took care of that. So what's the difference if the Zika goes away by Chalitza or the Zika goes away by death? The Zika went away. If the reason for the problem was Zika and the Zika goes away, Rachel should be mutter. Now again, in Rabbi Yochanan, the only time when the Zika goes away it's okay is when the second lady's Zika goes away. Because you need to have it that at the moment you fell the Yibum, you were already mutter. It won't work in the opposite direction, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Now, I'm going to say it, even though I said I wouldn't. It should be obvious why this question would be a question on Rav. Rav says in either direction you could do Yibum. On Rav, the Mishnah is even worse. Because at least in Rabbi Yochanan could say, well, no. What it's saying in the Mishnah is when one Rachel died first. So if Rachel dies first, you got the chalitza to both. Gemara is actually just suggesting. In Rav, you should be able to do yibum to either one, no matter who died first. Because according to Rav, all we care about is the zika being removed. According to Rav, if Leah dies first, you could do yibum with Rachel. If Rachel dies first, you could do yibum with Leah. See, you're saying it's much worse in Rav. The Gemara is just not addressing Rav. So we're only dealing with Rabbi Yochanan. Leah dies first. Rachel is mutter in yibum. So why isn't it okay for Leah to do chalitza with Yehuda? And once this happens,
no, chalitza, the other one do yibum.
And let Rachel do yibum with Levi. Because why not? What would be the Isser? Bittul mitzvahs yibum? There's no bittul. She's the only one that's stuck. Problem of achas chalitza.
Dead.
Because no. That here. Zika's already gone because of chalitza. Yeah. No more zika. What's the difference? No more zika from misa. No more zika from chalitza. That's the Gemara. That's the Gemara to the two dots. I mean, that's the question. That's the question we're addressing. You tell me that the halacha is that Rachel's going to be mutter in yibum. Just quoting our Mishnah. Why is it true that it's Cholzos Shlomi V'amai Leiku Chad Minai who let Levi get up Lachleit Slal Lishnia do Chalitza? I picked Levi here, but really it could have been I picked this Yehuda, but you got the idea. Yeah, let Yehuda do Chalitza with Lichleit Slal Lishnia to Leah, but to have it Rishayna Lagabe Idich, and Rachel will now be to Yehuda. Yevamos to Levi. Yevamos shehutra v'nezer v'chazer v'hutra tachzer lehetera harishan, which was the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Now all of a sudden, Levi and Rachel should be completely mutter to do yibum, just like Levi was mutter to do yibum with Rachel before, right? So this is the question, right? So this is the answer now. The answer is even more difficult. Amrlei achiyos eini yoidea mishanan. I don't know who taught this Mishnah. Meaning, the Mishnah that you guys all learn on Daf Chavav Amud Aleph. That Mishnah is not a good Mishnah. I don't know who the Tana is. I can't figure out who that is. It must be a mistaken Mishnah. It must be the Masorah is incorrect. There must be some problem with the Mishnah, which you don't find very often. It's a very strange teretz. In fact, I think Rabbi Kiva over here has a lot of problems with it. But that's his response. His response is, "You're bringing me a raya from the Mishnah. That Mishnah is wrong." Meaning, Einachanami. I would hold in that Mishnah, you could do this. That's really effectively what his response is. He says, "What do you mean? That Mishnah, the din would be that if you did chalitza with Leah, Rachel and Levi can go ahead and do yibum." Now the Gemara says multiple scenarios why Rabbi Yochanan could have said an answer for the Mishnah and still be consistent with his opinion, and he'll explain why he didn't like each and every one of those.
Maybe that's what you mean. Who said you have to learn it that way? Mishnah, I never said you should waste the Mishnah.
Meaning the Gemara's lamas are going to say, leave the Mishnah intact. Right. I'll explain the Mishnah away in a way that's consistent with Rabbi Yochanan's opinion.
Maybe that's what he meant all the time.
What do you mean?
When he said, I don't hold to the Mishnah, I don't hold the Mishnah the way you're saying it.
It's not mashma from the Gemara that way. It's mashma from the Gemara that he's literally saying,
Okay.
yeah, I can't find an explanation for the Mishnah, which is funny. I mean, generally speaking, Rabbi Yochanan.
What couldn't you figure that?
I don't know. So we'll see each one. Malay Malay.
How do they? This is all they all sitting in the same base members. How did it work?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it could just be that it was one past a conversation was being transferred from, hey, I was in this other place and I heard that Abaye said to this person, what did he respond? Well, Rav said back to this. Well, what's he gonna do with his pasuk? And it could be it's like quoted in this base measures from what happened over there. A little bit have to like a broken telephone. So obviously, broken telephone is a game no one cares about. When it comes to this stuff, people care. But you could have situations where Rav Yehuda said it in the name of Rav, and Rav Dimi said it. You have different. Okay, but yeah, no, it's a good question. So says the Gemara, Lema. Why not give the same answer we gave yesterday in a different context? That it means you do chalitza to one, meaning enechanami. Why not Rabbi Yochanan explain the Mishnah cholzos lo misyamis to mean cholzos le'leah, but enechanami you could do yibum to Rachel. It's just the cholzos is saying to Leah. Says the Gemara. What do you mean? There's a perfect answer why I didn't say that. Cholzos ketani. It says cholzos, which is plural. It's much when you're doing chalitza to two ladies.
Right.
The Gemara says no. The plural could be v'lei malei mal cholzos the alma. It just means you're doing chalitza to Leah, and yibum would be okay with Rachel. And cholzos, the plurality of cholzos, just means anytime this case comes up, all of those ladies, all of the Leahs of the world, does chalitza. The Gemara says no. There's a separate problem, just a technical problem. Hare elu ketani. Hare elu is also mashma that in this case the two ladies got to do chalitza. Okay, v'lema de chalitz leila rishayim bereisha, right? So then he says, then maybe we'll say that einachanami, that the chalitza with Rachel actually happened, right? And so now chalitza must be done with Leah. Meaning, maybe say the Mishnah, you could fit the Mishnah. Again, we're just trying to work out Rabbi Yochanan's opinion and still say that the Mishnah is a kosher Mishnah, and Rabbi Yochanan could hold of the Mishnah and it not be a problem with him. Why not just say that the explanation of the Mishnah is like this? When it says cholzos, it doesn't mean go do two chalitzas. It says, well, what happened if Rachel had chalitza done? Well, if Rachel had chalitza done, then Rabbi Yochanan would agree about that you got to do chalitza with Leah. Because remember, if Rachel's the one who dies first, Leah is going to be usher, because she was always usher. It's only when Leah's the one who dies that Rachel could do yibum, right? Well, what happens if someone jumped the gun and did chalitza with Rachel? So he says that's the Mishnah. Someone went ahead and did chalitza with Rachel. Says the Mishnah, you got to do chalitza with Leah. Rabbi Yochanan could say that. Gemara says no. Cholzos, as we flipped over the top of Chavches, cholzos lichatchila ktani. The language of the Mishnah implies cholzos. Hey, this is what you should do if you're stuck in the situation when you got two Yevamos falling to you. Do two chalitzas. Gemara says okay, but lay. Now the Gemara says an interesting answer. Why can't Rabbi Yochanan say the following? And I'll say it, and then we'll see it inside. Say that me'ikar hadin. This would be the halacha, and me'ikar hadin over here. You could do this. What's pshat in the Mishnah? Why we say even with Rachel to do chalitza? The Tana had an Issa Rabbanan, meaning Rabbi Yochanan is not a Tana. That Rabbi Yochanan is an Amayra, a very early Amayra, but he's not a Tana. He's not in Mishnayos. Why can't he say I hold that you could do yibum with Rachel once chalitza is done with Leah? You could do yibum with Rachel. If you could do yibum with Rachel, then how come the Mishnah says cholzos lo misyabmas? Because midar Rabbanan we said although me'ikar hadin you could do it. Maybe this Tana, the Tana of the Mishnah, holds that since if let's say someone did chalitza with Rachel, the halacha would be that with Leah you can't do yibum. So we don't want people to be confused. What? All of a sudden, when you've had the situation, I'm going to say down the block this happened, and I say, hey, I heard they did yibum. Oh, so I'm going to do yibum. So I'll even do yibum with Leah when Rachel is the one that we do chalitza. So therefore, maybe those are an Rabbanan. Very similar concept, exactly. Meaning, Rabbi Yochanan may not hold of that Rabbanan. He didn't make that takana. He may not agree with it. He may have some other reason why he doesn't hold of it, like he says over here. But the Tana could hold of such a Rabbanan. So why didn't he say that that's the explanation of the Mishnah? Again, the Mishnah, this is what I mean by saying that Gemara's mashma, that this wasn't what Rabbi Yochanan meant. Because the Gemara is clearly really trying to figure out, Rabbi Yochanan, just please do me a favor, say something. Says the Gemara, we're concerned that maybe we're talking about a case where someone went ahead and jumped the gun and did chalitza with Rachel, and now people are going to say, oh, if I could do yibum with, in the opposite scenario with Rachel, so now I should be able to do yibum with Leah. So says the Gemara, the answer, no. That would work potentially, but what does it say in the Mishnah? Which implies lo misyabmas ktani deleka din yibam hachaklal. which implies this isn't only like a secondary problem with the Yibam.
Yeah,
It's
right.
Me'ikar Adin, you can't do the Yibam, which is mashma even to Rachel when Leah's necklace. So the Gemara now says, and this I think is a very difficult line, but I'm going to explain it the way Rashi explains it, and we'll see if we can make it through. The Leimale Gzeira Shema Yomos, V'os Levatel Mitzvahs Yevamos. The way Rashi and some of the Rishonim explain this is what the Gemara means to say is as follows. I'm going to say it out loud because it's literally not in the words. We said there's two reasons as to why, in the case of the Mishnah, the halacha is you got to do chalitza to everyone. Why? Because Rachel and Leah are either achos kukasei, which is if you hold yesh zika, or if you hold ein zika. Well, if you do yibum with Rachel, well, now she's your wife's sister, right? If you do yibum with Leah, now Rachel imivatel is out. Now, why is that? Because we're nervous the other brother's going to die. Remember that? We're nervous the other brother's going to die. Meaning, in this scenario over here, there's only one brother. The moment you do yibum with Rachel, you're mivatel Leah. The moment you do yibum with Leah, you're mivatel Rachel because you're the only brother. You're the only one who could take care of the problem. And once you do yibum, she's your wife's sister. That's for sure a bittul mitzvah yibum. Here, in order for it to be a bittul mitzvah yibum, your brother, you have to do yibum with one, and then this guy's got to die, right? Before Rachel's taken care of, and now you got to go take care of her. You can't. She's your wife's sister. We have to be choshesh lemisa, but we say that. But either way, that's two pshatim in the Mishnah. So you either hold yesh zika or ein zika. So now the Gemara, what it's suggesting is, and I don't have a good explanation for why this is so, but the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, if you hold that the reason is because of zika and it's achos kukasai, there it makes zero sense to make an issa derabana, like you just said. It says v'loy misyavma. It says mashma. There's no derabana in the Mishnah. The Gemara's suggestion is why not say that the Mishnah is talking about ein zika, and when it's ein zika, you could say there's an issa derabana. Why? Because, and this is the part that I'm not so clear on, is for some reason, if the reason why is because of bittul yibum, because of ein zika bittul yibum, and that's why it's aser, that it makes sense to aser, a derabbanan. Whereas if it's talking about zika, not. And the svara might go something like this. I'm not 100% sure, but it can go something like this. What did we say earlier? Rav and Rabbi Yochanan both argue in this case, right? But everyone agrees to this case, right? But what about the opposite case? In the opposite case, Rav holds it's going to still be okay. Rabbi Yochanan would say no. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, there's no difference between, if the opposite were to happen, there's no difference, right? If, let's say, Rachel were to die, not Leah.
Right.
Rachel were to die, Rabbi Yochanan says it's a problem because Leah was never mutter, and so therefore you're going to need to do chalitza with Leah. Rav says it's okay. Why? Because he says whenever your wife dies, her sister becomes mutter, so it should be no different. So that means when it comes to achas kukasei, there is an opinion out there, the opinion of Rav, who says that the death of the wife makes the sister mutter. Well, if that's the case, then maybe over here also you could make the argument that once you get rid of a zika, right? Remember, Rabbi Yochanan would say you should be able to do yibum with Rachel. But if you hold that the reason why over here is because of mitzvahs yibum, now you can make an issa derabbanan. But if the reason is because of yesh zika, and this is an achos kukasei situation, there really is a major difference between the two cases. Because when Rachel falls, she's completely mutter. Leah is only what's the reason why Leah creates the problem? Because of achos kukasei. That completely goes away when the chalitza is gone. The reason for the isser is completely gone. But Rachel, on the other hand, when Leah became a Yevama, and now there's an Isser Bittul Yibam, there's a concern that we're going to say that if you allow Yibam with Rachel, you may come to allow Yibam with Leah. That's effectively how Rashi says it. It's not very clear why. Why are we saying it's more of a reason to say an Isser Derabanan when it's the Isser Bittul Yibam versus Zika? Yeah, it's okay. Okay. So the Gemara's suggestion is now, Rabbi Yochanan, you hold that if Leah dies first, Rachel you could do Yibam with. So the question is our Mishnah, why can't you say that you do Yibam here, and now Rachel can get, you do Chalitza here. Now Rachel has no more Zika, right? The Zika bond is gone. I'm going to cross it out as if she's dead just to make it visually helpful, yeah? So Leah is now no longer in the picture creating problems for Rachel. Right. So let Levi do Yibam with Rachel. This is the question of Rabbi Yochanan. It's mamish now the exact same case. Right. So why not? It said Mishnah says Chalitza, so we're going through trying to figure it out. Now the Gemara's suggestion is as follows. First, the Gemara said, let's say the reason why Yibam with her is usher because it looks a lot like to her. Meaning, what was the problem with her? At first, she was, let's say, achas kukasei. They were both achas kukasei. And why am I allowing you to do yibum with her and not with her? That's very confusing.
Confused.
So it's in the Siddur Rabbanan, the Gemara suggests. It says the Gemara, no, it's not mashman like that from the words in the Mishnah, says Rabbi Yochanan. But then the Gemara says, okay, if it's achos kukaso, your answer makes sense. When it comes to achos kukaso, I understand why there's no reason to make it a Siddur Rabbanan, right? Because you'll say, and here's the very doctristic svara, you might say something like, when Rachel fell, no one's going to make the mistake of thinking that Rachel is mutter in yibum, and I should have been thinking, I could even think Leah would have been mutter in yibum. Why? Because it's going to be very obvious to people that when Leah is taken care of, she's no longer a zika. And therefore, there's no concern for achas kukasei.
That's wiping away they're saying that there's no confusion now.
Confusion. Right. What I'm saying is there's less confusion there because people are going to see the reasoning for Rachel being mutter. The reasoning for Rachel being usher has already been taken care of in their face. Let's talk now about, according to the other opinion, that holds Ein Zika, and the only reason why you can't do Yibum with Leah is because if you do Yibum with Leah, now you have a problem with Rachel. What's the concern now? We're nervous the other brother might die. That's not something people in their minds. You might be Choshesh Lemisa. We might halachically be Choshesh Lemisa, but if I see a case, how does that case look to me? That case doesn't look to me like it's a problem. I don't think just because he was allowed to do Yibum with, just because he wasn't allowed to do Yibum with Leah, that he should be allowed to do Yibum with Rachel. Here it makes a ton of sense. Why? Because this looks exactly the same. What's the reason why I should be allowed to do Yibum with her now? Because she's gone.
Right, she's gone.
But the problem is there's going to be an isser bit. Mevatel mitzvah yibum when you do that, right? That's the whole concern. If the whole concern is mevatel mitzvah yibum, well, you haven't solved anything. Meaning, if the concern is you're chaysh lemisa, so I'm going to be chaysh lemisa. Rachel's going to be usher anyways. Does that make sense? It's a little bit. It's a very, very subtle distinction. I'm not even 100% sure I have it really 100%. Rashi's not even clear what the distinction is. But the Gemara is basically asking the same question twice. Gemara's question first is, if you're saying it's because of achas kukasa, you say it's an issa d'rabbanan. It says, no. If it's achas kukasa, I'm not going to make an issa d'rabbanan. And then the Gemara says, okay, why not say the Mishnah is going according to the Shita who holds Ein Zika? You hold Yesh Zika. The Mishnah is holding Ein Zika. And because of mitzvah yibum, you make an issa d'rabbanan. And on that, he says, you're right. Theoretically speaking, you could. Says the Gemara, no, because Rabbi Yochanan himself, Rabbi Yochanan l'misalei chayish. Meaning the entire idea of Itzer Bittul mitzvahs yibum is dependent upon saying I'm choshesh that maybe this brother might die. So if I allow the yibum over here,
what happens if he dies?
Then Rachel doesn't have a mitzvah yibum anymore. It goes away. So you've been mevatel the mitzvah of yibum with, meaning think of it this way: Reuven's house doesn't get a fix, right? Because really, when Reuven died, his house needed a fix, yibum or chalitza. But now that he died and he did yibum,
but
she's
the
stuck.
mitzvah yibum is just the yibum, or it's keep the house going forever.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's the second thing. Yeah. It's the second thing, and that's why you do the mitzvah.
And then you marry, so you till you have offspring. What happens? They marry forever, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the mitzvah is really to have yibum or the offspring, or both.
Well, the purpose of the mitzvah, the way the chinuch would say it, would be the purpose of the mitzvah is in order to fulfill his house forever. But the way you're makayim the mitzvah is by
just one time, and the mitzvah's done.
Correct. Okay.
So why can't?
Okay. It's tough.
Why can't Levi do Yibam with Rachel there? What's the problem?
According to Rabbi Yochanan,
the Zikaban was done early through Chalitza or even with Yibam.
Rabbi Yochanan would say you can't. The problem is the Mishnah says you can't. The Gemara is true.
Because Arbachim will low Yismach, right?
Yeah, it says Chutz lo Yevamos. Now the question is why? Rabbi Yochanan is bothered by that. Rabbi Yochanan would say, I don't know why. Well, if this is mutter, that should be mutter. That's what you're thinking, right? That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. So Rabbi Yochanan says, therefore the Mishnah must be wrong. Imagine I came to you and I said to you, hey, you say something, well, here, I have a Mefurish Mishnah. Imagine your response was, yeah, Mishnah's wrong. Rabbi Yochanan is saying a very, very serious thing. Gemara is trying desperately to figure out, oh, no, okay, Rabbi Yochanan, we're okay with you saying that the Mishnah is not like you, but at least explain the Mishnah in some other way that we can still leave the Mishnah intact. What Rabbi Yochanan is basically saying is erase the Mishnah, which does not happen. I mean, that's a very uncommon statement. So it says the Gemara is going through multiple attempts to try to figure out how do I make the Mishnah work, even if Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't agree with it. You have that all the time. Meaning, one simple answer could be, what do you mean? It's a machlekes Tanaim, and I go like the other Tana, that's not the Mishnah. That happens all the time. We have no problem with a Mishnah existing that's not like me. What we don't have is, very often at least, we don't have someone saying, oh, that Mishnah, mistake. There is no Tana who holds like it. What? That's what he's saying.
How do you reconcile the fact that he said it's a mistake?
That's what the Gemara is trying to solve right now. Every one of these, the Gemara is saying, Rabbi Yochanan, why didn't you at least say that maybe the reason why the Tana said that you can't do even with Rachel is because it's an Issa Rabbanan? No, it says, what did it say? He said, Mashma Lechatchila Ketani. Then he says, okay, so then say, V'lei Malei Gzeir Shem Yevamos. He says, no, that's a problem because Rabbi Yochanan doesn't hold that he's Choshesh Lemisa. Right. In every one of these cases, there's a suggestion in the Gemara as to why the Mishnah could have survived, at least Rabbi Yochanan's, in Rabbi Yochanan's mind. And Rabbi Yochanan's like, no, you're telling me that what's going on over here is the reason why Yibum is Aser with Rachel is because if I allow Yibum with Rachel, I may come to allow Yibum with Leah. Says Rabbi Yochanan, why? Why would that be a problem? Because Choshesh Lemisa? I'm not Choshesh Lemisa. Now, again, that's not a very good answer, really, because really the answer is okay, you may not be Choshesh Lemisa, but why can't the Tana be Choshesh Lemisa? Again, that's a very difficult line in Gemara.
Why do we care if Levi may, die one day?
What's that?
The possibility that
Because he's saying because then you don't have the mitzvah.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
the possibility that he's going to
Then you'll be able to even with it.
What's the question? Say Jeopardy. What's the question?
So why doesn't Yehuda just do chalitza with both of them?
You could. What's wrong?
And then there's no issue here.
Yeah, you're asking like how to solve the problem.
That's what the Mishnah says.
The Mishnah says chotzes.
Mishnah says.
Everyone's got to do, either he's got to do both, he does
You're
one,
saying
he does the
because
other.
they're saying
But
we're
the
gonna
question is, why does it reveal?
the mitzvah?
But
you
what-
say.
So just do chalitza with both of them. It's done.
Tell me, what are you asking me? You asking me like you're asking like a rav, like someone came to you and said to you what to do, and you're suggesting do both chalitzas?
It solves the problem.
Okay, but Rabbi Yochanan holds that you don't have to do that. You have the option of doing even with Rachel. If he does chalitza, let Levi do even with Rachel. The Mishnah's mashma not like that. Rabbi Yochanan would say you could do this, and Ali with the MS and the Maskana, Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that even with her is mutter. So the Mishnah says you can't.
Right,
So the
okay.
question is why.
Okay.
You're right. I mean, yeah, great. Mazel tov. Like you'll sit on Shabbos on your table. You won't move because you're being mekayim all the shitas. But like that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah is saying you can't do yibum. Why can't you do yibum?
Okay.
So where it says, okay, let's make another suggestion. V'lei malei Rebbe Eliezer. Why not just say that you're right? And Chanami, according to Rabbi Yochanan, you could do yibum with Rachel, but this Tana of this Mishnah is a different Tana, like I said before. How? Now we saw before the Rav and Rabbi Yochanan argued if Leah, when she becomes a Yevama, is usher. We said the moment at the Shas Nefila she's usher, then she's usher forever.
Forever, right? We always say that. No one argues about that, right?
About the existence of that halacha, no.
That you can,
But
you
Rav
take it
says
off,
that
you
only
take it
applies
off.
by
I
deraisa,
got it.
not by derabanan. And
So you can
Rabbi
take it
Yochanan
off.
even yes,
Right.
Rabbi Yochanan says even by derabanan. And Rabbi Eliezer goes a step further, and he says even if at the Shas Nefila you were mutter, if at any point in time you became usher, you can never remove an usher, even a derabanan. Says the Gemara, why not say that the reason why you can't do yibum with Leah or Rachel is because the Tana is Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that once you become usher, you're always usher. In which case, then Rachel's a problem too, because she was usher the moment Leah became a Yevama, because then it was Achos Kukasa or whatever it was. Says the Gemara, me the safe Rabbi Eliezer, Rachel Rabbi Eliezer. Take a look back in the Mishnah, above Aleph, the Mishnah quotes this halacha, and then it says Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Beishamai, Omer, Mikayim, Beisil, Omer, Yitzia. Rabbi Eliezer is right there in the Mishnah. You can't tell me the Reish is Rabbi Eliezer, and then it says Rabbi Eliezer Omer, right? That means must be the Reish is not Rabbi Eliezer, so that doesn't work. Okay, so says the Gemara, Nema lehu de nafel b'basachas. So here now says the Gemara, we're really getting to the weeds. Remember, we're trying to figure out a way to keep the Mishnah going, even like Rabbi Yochanan. What's the reason why you couldn't do Yibum with Rachel, says the Gemara? Say it because Reuven and Shimon died momentarily at the same moment. And since the whole predication of Rabbi Yochanan's halach is one died first, and then the other one died after, so Rachel for a moment before Leah became a Yevama was completely mutter on her own. What if they both died at the exact same moment? Now, they died be'isser. They were both falling be'isser. She's achos kukasei. Why not say that's the case of the Mishnah? And says the Gemara of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, which we saw earlier, the Amar Efshel Etzamtzem. He's of the opinion that we say that even though really technically someone had to have died first, we can't really assume
know.
that microsecond was exactly the same. In halacha, we treat it like as if it's the same. Says the Gemara, no, that can't be. Says Rabbi Yochanan, because lo yisasam lantana Rabbi Yossi Aglili. We're not going to make a stam mishnah like Rabbi Yossi Aglili. It's just not done. Rabbi Yossi Aglili is always, generally speaking, a individual opinion. He's never really the opinion that we go with, and therefore to say that a stam mishnah is like Rabbi Yossi Aglili is very uncommon and unlikely. Therefore, that opinion won't work. So then the Gemara says it's not like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, but say v'lei malei de lo yadeinan hey nafal bereisha. Why not say that the case of the Mishnah? The reason why you get to chalitza with both is because we don't know which one died first. We've been working with the assumption we knew Reuben was the one and Shimon was two. What if we're just not sure who died first? Meaning that the ambulance arrives on the scene, Reuben and Shimon are lying there dead, and we just don't know. Was Rachel the one who fell first, or was Leah? And that is only Hashem knows that. No, so what are we supposed to do now? I have to be concerned. Maybe Rachel was the first one that died. Sorry, maybe Reuben was the first one that died. So Rachel was the first Yevama. Although I should be able to do Yibum with her now, because she fell first. Maybe Leah was the first.
You don't know.
So I don't know which one was the first. So I don't know which one of these. So it's a suffix. So says the Gemara. And by the way, of all the answers, this seems to be like it's a big dochek to say the Mishnah is talking about where you don't know, but at least it completely explains why you got to do chalitza with both. Gemara says no.
It's good according to Rabbi Yochanan.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
And would this, and just think for a second, and this would answer according to Rav also? No, according to Rav, this would not answer. According to Rav, this would still be a question. So according to Rav, no matter which way you go, it's in fact, this would be a great answer. Rabbi Yochanan could say, let the Mishnah be a raya to me, because like Rav, the order doesn't matter. According to Rav, once you get rid of the Zika, you get rid of the Zika. So the second brother died, he created a problem. Just do chalitza with one, and Rachel should be fine. Or do chalitza with Rachel, the other one should be fine, according to Rav. But either way, it's not the Gemara. Ihachi says the Gemara, if we're saying that it's a suffix, and that's the reason why you can't do chalitza, you can't do even with Rachel. Ihachi hayru diktani kadmu v'kansu yaitziah. What do you mean? The Mishnah says, what happens if you went ahead and did yibum when you weren't supposed to? It says yaitziah in the Mishnah. So now bishlama rishon, it changes the gear. So here, meaning bishlama, let's say Yehuda amrina leiman shar yilach. Bishlama Yehuda doing Yibum with Leah was Aser. Why? Because they're both in existence, and there's a Zika with both, because you have a problem of Achos Kukasek. So therefore you can't do Yibum, you got Chalitza. Ela Shnia, why don't we say that Levi, when he does Yibum with Rachel, let him say that Chavroi, my brother Yehuda, Shnia Yibum, he was the one who did Yibum with the second one, and therefore, did Chalitza with the second one who died. And therefore I'm just coming to do an Ana Rishonim Yabim, and I'm really doing Yibum with the correct one, the one who died first, meaning it's a suffix. Why don't we say that he can go ahead and do Yibum? Right? So I'm going to explain it outside because the words don't 100% fit what the Gemara is saying. What the Gemara is saying is as follows. If it's a case of a suffix, which is what the Gemara's suggestion is, right? And that's the reason why there's no Chalitza. We saw earlier in the Masechta that when you have a case, do you remember the case where someone married a woman and he's not sure which of the two women he married? Remember that case? You were like, how's that possible?
Two brothers married.
Right? So we had a case where we went through a bunch of scenarios, one and then two. How is it possible you can marry a woman and not know? But the Gemara said over there that if such a thing happened, halacha was, we said you can't do yibum with both. We said you do chalitza. But then the Gemara said, what if you did yibum with both? We said you don't have to divorce her. Why? Because once you did yibum with one, the zika's gone. Right? So now all of a sudden, there's no reason not to stay. There's no more zika. Right? Do you remember the case?
Yeah.
So I just didn't know which one of these ladies was usher to me as achos kukas. Right? I just didn't know which one. Or achos klutzaso in that case. Yeah. So it's a suffix if she's usher to me. So we said over there, me suffix, you keep it. Well, the suggestion of the would be that say we don't know who died first, so it's a suffix. So therefore, that's the reason why you got to do chalitza to both. But the problem is, what does it say in the Mishnah? It says in the Mishnah on Daf above, in this case, v'im kadmu v'kansu yotziu. That can't be a case of a suffix. We've already learned that when it's a suffix, you let them stay. Meaning, Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Shammai or Mikayim, but we're not passing the Mishnahs like Shammai. We're passing the Mishnahs like Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel says yotziu. So this case is talking about a case of a suffix. We've already laid down a principle earlier that in a case of a suffix, you could stay married. Here it's saying you got to get divorced. Clearly, we're not talking about a case of a suffix. So says the Gemara, and that's why Rabbi Yochanan responded by saying, I got no clue who this Mishnah is. It can't be Rabbi Eliezer. It can't be the opinion who holds Ein Zika because of the Issa Rabbanan. It can't be true that you can't do even to Rachel because you could do even to Rachel. I don't know what to do with the Mishnah. Says Rabbi Yochanan. I mean, really, Rav doesn't have a better answer. Rav is just as stuck. But maybe Rav can answer some of these. Okay, that's first step of the Gemara.
Shoot.
And I think that was the easier part of the daf.
Wow.
No, okay, no, that's not true. From here, actually, till the to the two dots here, it's not complicated in like the keeping track of things like the way this one was. It goes faster.
Hold on, I'm gonna get. I have a call at 8:30.
Oh.
Can you with your other? What do I have to do?
Pick it up, look up.
Okay.
Finish your hands. You got it. Push your yocha.
Robert,
You
what's
should be
your,
zeicha to have a Pesach without any chametz.
I mean, what's your personal PayPal? How does it work?
I don't remember.
Let's put it out here on let's say it on the Zoom so everyone can start sending you money.
You don't have one?
Gmail.com?
You have a quick pay?
Quick pay?
It's out. You got some type PayPal.
Zelle? But Zelle is to you. I want to send to you personally, Rabbi.
Rabbi Bloomstein at gmail.com?
Okay. What? Through,
Yeah, but-
through what? Through Zelle? Okay, perfect.
I hope it's there.
So I'm doing it right now. Perfect.
Okay, says the Gemara Vayit. So what did it say in the Mishnah? It said in the Mishnah
Thank you.
Of course.
that Rabbi Lazar Aimer B'Shami Aimer. So what did it say? The evidence in the Mishnah was, let's say, in this
Yeah,
case,
you here. We got it.
Okay.
let's say, although you're supposed to do chalitza to
It
both,
actually says Yismach anyway.
Okay, fine. Yismach is great.
All right.
so what did it say in the Mishnah? It said in the Mishnah
Thank you.
that you got to do chalitza to both. This is the Mishnah, right? Right? This is the din of the Mishnah. Reuben, Shimon die, Rachel and Leah survive. Levi and Yehuda got to do chalitza with Rachel and Leah. Shalom al Yisrael. Okay.
Shalom.
Now it said in the Mishnah, what happens if they disregarded it and they went ahead and did Yibum with Rachel and Leah? Now, let's just walk through it. If they did Yibum, not chalitza, right? So then, first of all, they're married. I mean, this is Zika, right? And not only that, once you do Yibum with Leah, so then the Zika goes away, right? So Rachel's no longer Achos Kukasai. So this should be mutter, right? Let's say they both did Yibum. We should l'chayr not have to make them get divorced. Because why can't they stay together now? What's the reason why they can't stay together? They're no longer married, right? He's no longer married to his wife's sister or his Achos Kukasai. There's no more Zika.
Right.
He's married to Rachel, he's married to Leah, Shalom al Yisrael. It says in the Mishnah though, you have to divorce. So then it said, Rabbi Eliezer, Amir Beshami, Amir Mikayim, Beis Hillel, Amir Yetziu. So there's a machlekes Beshami, Beis Hillel, according to Rabbi Eliezer. That's the din of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Tanya. I have a brisa. Brisa says, sorry, no, I jumped a little bit.
Then,
Let's go up. Yeah, it's not. It said in the Mishnah the following. Right. Haisa achas mehen asura al ha'echad iser erva. Right. This is the case where. Let's make Levi with Rachel and Erva. Right? So now we said that Yehuda has to do here, they're both chalitzas, right? But since there's an Erva relationship with Rachel between Levi, comes out that Leah could do Yibum with Levi. Because what's the whole reason why Yehuda can't do Yibum with either one of them? Because it's Achos Kukasai. Well, if there's an Erva relationship with Rachel,
no Zika.
then there's no Zika. In which case then Leah is no longer the sister of my Zika because there's no Zika here.
Right.
So therefore he could do Yibum with her. This is it said in the Mishnah.
Correct.
Said in the Mishnah, Tanan Haisa Achas Mehan Asura Halacha Echad. Isser Erva. So let's say, did I do this right? Yeah. Okay. Asur Ba Umutur Ba'achaisa. Right? He can have Yibum with the sister, but not with her. Let's use an Erva. V'hasheni Asur B'Shnein. But Yehuda's got a problem with both because for him, nothing's been fixed. So then, as the Gemara says like this, the Gemara is choosing that this Erva.
I was going to ask how it was possible with one and not the other. Got it.
There's a couple of different ways, but yeah. Okay. So it says, Chalasai, but we'll use Chamoisa because that's the Gemara's example.
Yeah.
Salka
Yehuda
daita.
already do chalitza
What's that?
with Leah? Didn't Yehuda already do chalitza with Leah?
No. This is I'm just
New case.
this is it's the we're re-looking at the Mishnah, not what happened, but
Could happen.
what could happen. Yehuda must do chalitza, no, because it's achos kukasei. But for him, it's not achos kukasei because there's an erva to take care of the zika. So therefore, this is going to be mutter. So it says the Gemara, Sal kedai techamina demnaf l'chamaisei tchila. We're going to have a havamina that first Reuven died, right? So that means who fell first?
Rachel.
To Levi,
Erva.
Rachel. So it's an erva, right?
Wiped out immediately.
Okay. Says the Gemara, Ve'amai, why don't we say, let's let Yehuda do Yibum with Rachel? This is a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan. Why? Rabbi Yochanan's opinion again is that as long as the person who falls is the one who I'm ending to do Yibum with, then Leah dying is fine. So what happened over here? Reuben died first. Rachel became a Yevama. In this moment, Levi couldn't do Yibum with her because Levi is an erva, but Yehuda could. Why couldn't Yehuda do it? Of course he could. In this very moment, Rachel should be completely mutter, right? Assuming again that Reuven died first. If Reuven died first, then Rachel should be able to do Yibum with Yehuda. Says the Gemara, "Mamai leiku chasan liyabim hachde ena chamoisa beresha." Let Levi now go do Yibum with Leah, which he's allowed to do, because again, there's no Zika with Rachel, so it's not a Cheskukasai. Leah is taken care of now. All that's left is Rachel. Why can't Yehuda do
Shimon
Yibum?
died already. Also, they both died.
Yeah, they both died.
Oh, they both
Sorry,
died.
I didn't say that. Yeah. Yehuda can do. Why can't Yehuda do Yibum with Rachel now? What would be the reason why it's a problem? Because what? Achos Kukasai? What do you mean? He just took care of it. Wouldn't this be exactly the same thing as this case here? Look, Levi did Yibum with Leah, who's allowed to Yibum with, which is like the equivalent of her dying. Basically, there's no more Zika. So all left is Rachel, who, when she first fell, was completely mutter to do Yibum. So isn't this a case of Tahabe Chamos Lagabe Idach, make Rachel the erva to Yehuda? Ki Yevama shehutru v'neser v'chazer v'hutra. This is Rabbi Yochanan's case. She is now no different than this woman here. Let her be mutter to do Yibum with. Tachzer lehatera harishan. Meaning again, when Reuven first died, Yehuda could have done Yibum with Rachel. Just moments after Shimon died, and now he can't do Yibum with Rachel. Why? Because it's achos kukasei. But okay, Levi's allowed to do Yibum with Leah. Let him do that. Knocks out the Zika, just like when she died, it knocked out the Zika. And now I was allowed to do Yibum with Rachel. Let him do Yibum with Rachel. That's the question of Rabbi Yochanan. Again, the havamina is that of course Rachel fell first. So it's the Gemara. No, Leah fell first. Now, since Leah fell first, they granted
Shimon died first.
Shimon died first. Thank you. And Leah fell to the Yibum first. So since Leah fell to the Yibum first, now when Levi does Yibum with Leah, that doesn't help him for Rachel because she was also the moment Reuven died. She was also because of Achas Kukasai.
Right.
Therefore, even Rabbi Yochanan would agree.
Right.
Now the kasha could be on Rav. This would. I'm saying it's just interesting. The Gemara is not bothered with Rav's opinion, but okay, we're not going to go there. Okay, Rabbi Lazar.
Especially difficult. It feels like especially difficult.
It is an especially difficult Gemara. Yeah, let's put it this way. Some people said that Daf Tesam and Beis. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Which is the
right. We thought
they said that was the hardest
right.
Gemara. This Gemara contains Daf Tesam and Beis on Amud Beis, meaning so this contains the hardest. This Gemara already contains the hardest.
This is Chavches Amid Aleph.
Yeah.
And you're talking about base.
Yeah, we're not there yet.
No.
But
All right, I have to go. No,
I'm going to go to.
Let's
Really?
No,
Well, you guys got to know that we're starting the mission tomorrow. Either way, by hook or by
Hold on a
crook.
second. We're starting
the Mishnah on
tomorrow,
Daf Chesam and Beis on the bottom. We're gonna pick up from there.
I'm going to try to do this.
No, you got to do yourself. You got to do.
No, but we're gonna go over the Levites now. We're gonna go back to
Every time I
now.
bring this mincha, like last night again, you're like, where do you get this? I'm like, I don't know. How many runs the dog?
I'm gonna find out.
Yes.
I'm gonna find out.
Thank you.
Should I get some more then? I mean, people
Just random people like who visit. I never met them before. Say to me, where do you get this from? People ask all the time.
I should get like another half a dozen people. No, but I'm saying,
No, don't have to get more. Tell them to come. Tell them to come down. Tell them to come to the top.
don't get more.
All right,
No.
see you ready tonight, 8 o'clock, Mr. Chef.
Yes. No, mincha first.
I'm going mincha early because tomorrow.
Okay.
Tanya. So it said in the Mishnah.
There's no min.
Yes, the regular mincha, 8:05.
It said in the Mishnah.
7:05.
7:10, Rabbi.
7:10.
Oh, what are you talking about? What is?
Mincha time.
Yeah,
7:10,
yeah. Okay, ready?
Okay, let's go.
Rabbi Lazar, I'm Rabbi Shamir. So it said in the Mishnah that what happens in this case over here, where no erva, just regular normal case, said you got to do chalitza to both, right? Let's just make life a little bit cleaner here again.
I just understand that we both have to leave it in 10 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to try to explain that as much as I can. Yeah.
And then what happens? We got to do this ourselves.
Yeah.
So we're not even going to get up to.
Okay, so let's listen. I'm going to try to go as fast as I can.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Let's leave at 22.
Okay.
What time are you leaving?
I also have to get going.
So yeah, 15 minutes, let's say. Yeah. Okay. So
15 minutes.
okay, let's try to do what we can here.
Okay.
So it says in the Gemara. So it said over here in the Mishnah that b'diavad you have to go ahead and be mighty. So in the normal case, you got to do chalitza. What if they did yibum? The halacha is that the Mishnah says Levi has to divorce Rachel and Yehuda has to divorce Leah. Nothing to talk about. Why? Because they shouldn't have done it. Achas kukasei. Now l'chayra, they should be allowed to stay because once they each did yibum, the zika goes away, right? So the Gemara says like this: Tanya, Rebbe Lomer Beishami Emrim Yikaim Beisila Emrim Yitziu. It's just quoting our Mishnah. Continues the Brisa. Reb Shimon Oimer Yikaim. Reb Shimon says no. They could leave it, meaning not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says Yitziu, and then it brings them machlekes. Beisham Beisila. Beishamai says Yikaimu, and Beisila says Yitziu. Abashol Oimer Kal Hoya Lehem LeBeisil B'Davar Zeh, which is Lishitasei. Beisila was Mekel. Shebeshamai Oimrim Yitziu. Beisila Oimrim Yikaimu. Meaning, Abashol flipped it. So let's just work it out. You have Abishol who says that Beis Hillel was the one who says it could stay. You have Reb Eliezer says the opposite, that Beis Shammai is the one who says you could stay. And then you had the Shita of Reb Shimon who said on his own, no, not discussing Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, on his own, he says, Yikaimu. So ask the Gemara the following question on this brisa. Reb Shimon Kiman, what's he saying? Beis Shammai, if he's saying like Beis Shammai, meaning to say, according to the opinion of Reb Eliezer's Beis Shammai, then Hainu Reb Eliezer. He's effectively just saying that he's Reb Eliezer. He's a repeat of Reb Eliezer. Because if Beis Shammai holds Yikaimu, then Beis Hillel holds Yitziu. And Beis Hillel, and if he's saying I hold like Beis Hillel that holds that Yikaimu, that would be Hainu Abishol. Because Abishol says that Beis Hillel says Yikaimu and Beis Shammai says Yitziu. Gemara says Reb Shimon's really saying there's no machlekes. What he's saying is a liba the kulel. Meaning Reb Eliezer holds the machlekes in one direction, Abishol holds the machlekes, Beis Shammai holds in the other direction. Says Reb Shimon, there's no machlekes. Everyone holds Yikaimu, meaning Shalokar Mishnah. Which, by the way, Reb Yochanan could la'olam answer that's pshat in our Mishnah. Meaning, because we said if our Mishnah is a suffix, I mean the Gemara could have said that. This is like another question the Gemara could have asked, but it's fine. Okay, then it said in the Mishnah, Haisa achas mehem. This is talking about where you have one erva. So in this case over here, you have an erva, right? You have an erva over here. So what did it say in the Mishnah? When you have two brothers, Levi and Yehuda, you have Rachel as an erva to Levi. It said in the Mishnah that Levi can do Yibum with Leah, and Yehuda has to do Chalitza with both, like we saw before. Says the Gemara. This entire halacha was already taught once before. The idea that once one's an erva, the other one is mutter and Yibum. We've already taught this. This is a Mefurish Mishnah on Daf Chaf. The Mishnah on Daf Chaf said, if you remember, I'll just read it quickly. The Mishnah says, Klal Amr B'Yevamos Kol Shehi Iser Erva Leicha Letza Shalom Yisyabemis. We know this. We know that the halacha is on that person. Is it right? And it says over here, Lo Yisyabemis. So we already know the halacha is you can't do Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel, which means the Zika is gone. So of course you can do the Yibum with Leah. Why do we have to teach a whole new Mishnah teaching this exact same halacha? The Gemara says no. This is it's a little bit of a stronger question. Not just that the din is you can't do Yibum with Rachel, but we said before in the Mishnah that when you have one who's an erva, you could do Yibum with Leah. We already taught the halacha of that you could do Yibum with Leah. We already taught this halacha. The Gemara says it's two different cases. The case of Daf Chaf, take a look up here. The case of Daf Chaf is where you only had one brother. That's the case of Daf Chaf. The case of Daf Chavav is where you have a second brother. That's the only difference.
We have to give up.
Right. So the Gemara says like this, and that's the Gemara's question. It's the same case, really. What's the difference? The Gemara says, what do you mean? If I would only teach a case here of two brothers, Mishum Deleka Lemigza Mishum Sheni. Sorry. If you would say over here, in this case over here, what am I going to say? It's also to do Yibum and Leah because we're nervous that maybe it'll come to do Yibum with Rachel. There's no second brother that you have to be concerned about. So there's no reason to have to be concerned that if I allow Levi to do Yibum with Leah, Yehuda may come to do Yibum with Rachel. There's no problem because there's no second brother. So therefore, I'll say Mishum deleka lemigzim mishum sheni. Aval hacha diika lemigzim mishum sheni. Because let's say you have another brother, I have to be concerned if I allow Levi to do Yibum with Leah, which
Maybe
he's
Yehuda.
making her do. Maybe Yehuda might think I could do Yibum with Rachel, which he can't. So therefore, Tzricha needed to say that case. And Ema loy. So therefore, Kamash Malan, our Mishnah teach me that even over here, it's going to be mutter for Levi to do Yibum with Leah. And if all I would do is have it in this case, that I would tell you
Word.
that Levi allowed to do Yibum with Leah, I might think in this case, he's not. Why? Why would I not allow to do it? Says the Gemara. I might think as follows. He says, by having a second brother here, it's clear that by me doing Yibum here with Leah and him not doing Yibum with Rachel, the fact that I have a second brother is Gufa explaining to me that the reason why Leah is okay is because I have a unique relationship with Rachel. But if you don't have another brother here, then it's just a case of a guy with two Yevamos falling to him. So I might think that if I could do even with her, maybe I could do even with her. And therefore, Kamash Malan, I needed to teach the Mishnah Daf Chav to tell me that no, even over there, Yibam is mutter. Aval Hasam deleka sheni emaloi tzrich. Fine. Issa says the Gemara Vayta. Isser mitzvah. What did it say in the Mishnah? Said in the Mishnah that in this case here, when you have Levi and Yehuda, and this isn't an erva anymore, this is now, let's say, shnia, right? So it's a mitzvah, let's say. Right, it's an Isser mitzvah or an Isser kedusha. It said, but either way, it's not a kare, it's not an erva. So there's a zika going all the way around. What did it say in the Mishnah? It said in the Mishnah, this choltzas v'lo misiyamos. We don't say you could do yibum with any of them. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's achos chlutzasar, achos kukasai. The fact that there's an Isser, okay, it just tells you you can't do yibum with her, but that's not mafkia zika. There's still a zika here. So if there's a zika here, that's achos kukasai. There's a zika here, that's achos kukasai. So it's chotz v'lo misiyamos. Ask the Gemara. This is also taught in that Mishnah Daf Chav. Hanami tanina. Isser mitzvah ve'isser kedusha chayletza salami sebemis. That's the first Mishnah Daf Chav. The Mishnah said when you have an Isser mitzvah, that does not mafkia zika. There's still a zika. So Gemara says no. Hasam in the case in the Mishnah Daf Chav, Isser mitzvah lechuda. There's only one Yevama. The case is not where you had Rachel and Leah. That was just the case where you have Ruvain. You have Ruvain here. You have Shimon here. You have a woman who is an Isser mitzvah, and then Shimon dies. So now what's Ruvain supposed to do? It says in the Mishnah that Ruvain is not allowed to do Yibam, rather he needs to do Chalitza. That's in the first Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Hacha Isser mitzvah ve'achosa. Here you have two ladies falling. When you have two ladies falling, I might think the following thing. Leikum Isser mitzvah be'makum Isser erva. I might say that even though it's not an erva, midrabanan, we're going to treat it like it's an erva and say that just like Rachel, since you can't do Yibam with Rachel, you might be allowed now to do Yibam with Leah. V'tisyabim, the sister Rachel, right? And again, it's a little bit of a difficult svara to understand why I might say that. But if you say that the mitzvah, when you have two sisters, when you have one sister, there's nothing to talk about. You got to do chalitza. But I might think Leah's mitzvah's yibum, let it be docha the issa derabanan, meaning to say what? I have an issa with Rachel. Fine, I can't do yibum with Rachel. That I completely understand. But I have no issa yibum with Leah. So what's the problem? It's achos kukasai. Okay, that's only an issa derabanan. Maybe the rabbis pushed that issa derabanan off in order for you to be makayim, the ideal version of yibum. That's what the Gemara says. Kamash Malan that you don't. It says Gemara, "Tisyabim." What's the havmin? How can you be miyabim? It's achos kukasei. Kibin midaraisa ramya kamei kak paga be'achos kukasei. Listen. This doesn't take off a zika. If this is still a zika, then this is achos kukasei. So what was the head to do this? Because the mitzvah yibum says Gemara, yeah. Sakudat techaminim mishum mitzvah the avid rabbanan that the yibum they would allow you to do it. Kamash Malan. Says the Mishnah Weiler. Hoyso achas mehen. What if you'd have a case where they're both in erva? So now this is no longer a mitzvah kedusha. This is a case of erva. And this is a case of erva. So this is mamish the case of achosa shehi avimta. This is mamish the case where Levi can now do yibum with Leah and Yehuda can now do yibum with Rachel. Because each one of them is not an achos kukasai. Because each one of them is each one of the lady's sisters is no longer a zika. Says the Gemara, Hasulamali. This case was also taught earlier. Not on Daf Chaf, this Mishnah. Once you tell me the case where one's an erva, what's the difference between when one's an erva versus when both an erva? All you really do is just applying the same halacha twice. Gemara says, Hainu hach. It's exactly the same case as when it's one. Mali lechad, mali letrei. What's the difference? If you tell me that once I have a yibum relation, an erva relation with Rachel, I could do yibum with Leah. So then the Yehuda can also do yibum with Rachel if he has an erva relation with Leah. Gemara says tzricha. The iyashmin and hasim. If I only teach the case where there's one erva, whereas the other one not. Mishum the sheni demuchach. By having two brothers, I might think I'm not going to be concerned. I might say that there's no reason to be concerned that Levi, if Levi could do yibum Leah, I might think Yehuda can do even with Rachel because there's two separate brothers. He has the erva and he doesn't have the erva. Whereas Aval Hacha, the Leka Sheni, when you're talking about the first case where it's only going to be one erva and not the other, the Aval Hacha, the Leka Sheni, the Kamuchach, Emaloi. I might think that maybe we have to answer it even on Levi to do even with Leah because Yehuda is going to maybe think that I could do even with Rachel. Kamash Milan. You need both. And what about the flip side? If I teach you the halachas here, that the halacha is Levi could do even with Leah and Yehuda could do even with Rachel, I might think Dafka here can they do that? But what happens if he's not an erva, and this one over here would be chalitza, right? I might think that now Levi has an isser to do even with Leah. Why? Adarabba, Travayu Muchi Adadi, Viyashmin and Hacha, Adarabba, Travayu Muchi Adadi. They're both an erva, so everyone knows why you're doing yibum. But Masha'inkin about Idach, in another case where Yehuda has no erva whatsoever with Rachel or Leah, I might think Loi, and therefore Tzricha because of the Isser. Otherwise, there would have been an Isser Rabban. Okay. Zuhi Sha'amru.
That is the last sugi, right?
Before the repeat of Daf Tes.
Okay, so let's get to repeat of that. Where does that start? B'kulani Kara.
Yeah, Amr of Yehuda. Yeah.
Okay.
Where are we now? Where are we?
We're holding 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from where it gets wide. V'zuhi Sha'amru. It's the last line of the Mishnah. It said, Zuhi Sha'amru achos she'yeh vivta. Right? Asur lazeh. Yeah? Sorry, Asur lazeh, matar lazeh, ve'asur lazeh, matar lazeh. Zuhi l'mu'utei mai. The din of the Mishnah of saying Zuhi l'mu'utei, Zu, whenever the Mishnah specifies, it's coming to exclude something. Meaning it said in the Mishnah, when is it that it's Asur lazeh, matar lazeh, ve'asur lazeh, matar lazeh, when it's an erva? It's coming l'mu'utei, isser mitzvah lazeh, ve'isser mitzvah lazeh. What happens if, instead of this being an erva here, instead of these being ervas, Levi and Rachel are an Isser Mitzvah, and Yehuda and Leah are an Isser Mitzvah. So now there's still Achos Kukasai in both directions. Right? So didn't we just have this above 2 seconds ago? Ask the Gemara. Hasu Lamali. What do I need to teach this case for? Why do I need to teach a case of 2 mitzvahs? I already know the halacha. By Isser Mitzvah, we said that still it's an Achos Kukasai, and therefore it's going to be Isser. You might have had a Havamina to do it because of the mitzvahs even of Leah. Kamash Malam, we didn't do that. What's the difference? Hasu Lamali, Hainu Hach. It's the same exact case before. Mali Lechad, Mali Litrei. Gemara says, but when do we say that we don't treat Rachel like an erva, but rather we treat her like a mitzvah? Maybe it's only when there's one case. Why? When, if this would not be the case, now I might say we have to make a gzeira, right? Since I could have made a gzeira, I got to teach you this halacha. Whereas aval heila the lekel and migzer mishuni, because now they're both a mitzvah. Maybe now I'll actually will say that really he could do even with Rachel and he could do even with Leah. And therefore it's like we'll be mafkia the zika. Therefore, Kamash Malan, that they should be able to do yibum. Kamash Malan, they can't. Okay, we'll pause there on that Gemara. The next Gemara here, Amar Rav Yuna Marav, V'chein Tani Rabbi Chia.
We already did.
It's Gemara we already did. It's a little bit of a complicated Gemara, but just I'm gonna draw it so when you learn it, you at least you have it.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like this. You have a case like this. Yeah, okay. You have a case, if you remember.
It's not in the last case. But we have to go on to the Mishnah, and we're doing the last piece right now. 2 dots.
Okay.
So, yeah.
The last case is very complicated. Okay.
Rabbi Yehuda.
So I'm gonna do it up here. If you remember correctly, our Mishnah says 15 arayas, right? So the Mishnah said you had 15 arayas. So let's say you have Reuven and Shimon. Okay, and Reuven and Shimon have, we said Reuven and Shimon are dying, leaving over Rachel and Leah, who are sisters. And our Mishnah is where you have Levi and Yehuda. And our Mishnah says that there's a scenario where Rachel is an erva to Levi, and Leah is an erva to Yehuda, and so therefore Yehuda could do Yibum with Rachel, and Levi could do Yibum with Leah. This is called Achosa Sheyivimta Surul Lezeh. Leah is Asur to Yehuda, but Yehuda Surul Lezeh Mutaris Lezeh, Surul Lezeh is Mutaris Lezeh. That's the din of the Mishnah. Rabbi Chia on Daf Tes had said, and here it's on our Gemara as well. He said this Mishnah of saying Levi being okay with Leah and Yehuda being okay with Rachel can apply in all 15 of the ervas in our Mishnah, Bitoy Bas, which means you have to find scenarios. Now, that long Rashi and that Testament phase went through all of the cases. Now, there are two scenarios that were discussed in that Gemara, and they're discussed here also. And it said, first there was an opinion of Rabbi Chia, it said all 15, and then I forget who it is, maybe it's Abaye, I think it's Abaye, someone said, I only start counting from Chamoso, meaning the first 6 I don't count. Why? Because of Bito. Because it has to be that Bito is Me'anusaso. Let's work this out. Very simple. If Rachel and Leah are sisters, and you're telling me that Leah is Levi's daughter, and Rachel is Yehuda's daughter. How could that be? How could it be that Levi's daughter is Leah and Yehuda's daughter is Rachel? And Rachel and Leah are sisters. The only way is if they're sisters from their mother. Meaning that would mean Levi and Yehuda slept with the same lady. One slept with her and produced Rachel, and one slept with her and produced Leah. So that means, how are Rachel and Leah sisters? Clearly not from the brothers, only from the mother, which is fine. That's okay. They're achosim. There's nothing wrong with that. Problem is that it'll come out now that Levi and Yehuda were with the same lady. That cannot possibly be in marriage. Because if Levi was married, and Yehuda wasn't allowed to marry her because they had a kid, that's mamish nisser of Eishazad.
They got divorced.
No, it doesn't matter. You can't marry your brother's wife.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's an nisser Eishazad. So it would come out that Rachel and Leah, first of all, it would be Mamzerim. But so says the Gemara, must be talking about a case where Levi had, we'll call the mother Sarah. Levi had a girlfriend. And Yehuda had a girlfriend. And they just, one had Rachel first, and the other one had Leah, or whatever, the other way around, but you got the idea. So the point is, says Abaye, you can't count the first 6 because once you're talking about the classification of Bita is not included. So therefore, because it could only be from Nusasli, and our mission is not talking about Nusasli. Yeah. Then the Gemara says, no, I can even count it Bita because I have no problem putting Mount Nusas in the Mishnah, but I'll tell you who I can't put in. I can't put that we're talking about Eishas Achshalei Hoya B'Elamai. Why? Because by making it Eishas Achshalei Hoya B'Elamai, it only would work according to Reb Shimon. If you remember the Machlokes, Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. First? Reb Shimon and the Chachamim argue over Ashba, right? Of Eishas Achshalei B'Elamo. Is it always Eishas Achshalei B'Elamo if you were not alive?
Right. Or only if
when you were born, the woman who you're describing is not currently married.
Right.
Let's say when Reuven dies. This is the right model. When you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, we say that if Levi's not born yet, and Reuven and Shimon are married to Rachel and Leah, right? We're actually, you could do it that way. The sisters isn't really so important, Rachel and Dinah, right? So if, let's say in this case over here, Shimon dies, and now Dinah falls to Reuven. Everyone agrees that if Levi's born now, she's an Eishes Hakshalo B'Elamai. But if he does Hebum, and then he's born, now that's a machlokes between Reb Shimon and the Chachamim. According to Reb Shimon, it's fine. According to the Chachamim, it's Eishes Hakshalo B'Elamai. So it says the Gemara like this: since that's Eishes Hakshalo B'Elamai according to the Chachamim and not according to Reb Shimon, how are you going to make Levi be usher to Leah because of Eishes Hakshalo B'Elamai? The only way to do that is to say that Levi was born after Shimon died, right? But Reuven did even with Leah, right? And in order for Yehuda to be an Eishes Achshel with Rachel, it'll mean that Yehuda was born after Ruvain died and before anyone did Yibum with Rachel. The problem is that whichever one you go in, Levi and Yehuda have to be born one before the other. Whichever one was born last, according to the Chachamim, will be Eishes Achshel with both of them, by definition, right?
How do you have?
So therefore, since over here what we're saying is that Yehuda and Rachel are an
Good.
Ereva, but Yehuda's okay with Leah,
Yeah,
and
how's
Levi
that?
is an Ereva with Leah, how could you have
Yeah.
Eishes Achshel Lamai? By definition, one of these, let's say Yehuda was the younger brother, then that would mean that Reuven and Shimon died and Yehuda wasn't born yet. So then both of them are Eishes Achshel Lamai according to the Chacham. But if you tell me that there's another brother, Yisachar and Zvulun, right? I'm not sure if I'm lining the names up the way the Gemara does it, but basically the Gemara says like this. Well, what happens if when Reuven died, right? So instead of this and this, we'll say that we're not talking about Levi and Yehuda's relationship. What we're saying is they died, and we'll start with, let's say, Yisachar. Yisachar's not born yet. Reuven and Shimon, and we'll say that Shimon is alive. Shimon didn't die yet, and he wasn't born yet. Okay. Reuven dies. Now Rachel falls to Yibum to Yisachar, Levi, and Yehuda. Any one of them could do Yibum, right? No problem.
Mhm.
Now, let's say Levi does, then Yisachar is born. So Rachel to Yisachar is an Eishes Achshel Lamai. Okay, so Rachel's a problem forever. Now, Levi does Yibum. So now Levi is married to Rachel, and Yisachar is an Ereva to Rachel because of Eishes Achshel Lamai.
Yep.
This side is good. Now, Shimon dies. Before Yehuda does Yibum with Leah, Zvulun is born. Zvulun is an Eishes Achshel Lamai, Ashpa, whatever, with Leah.
Yeah.
So, and now Yehuda does Yibum. So Yehuda over here, married to Leah, and they have a brother,
You.
Zvulun, who is also to Leah as an Ereva. So now, just to see the case, you have Achosa, Yevamos, they're sisters.
Is he loud?
Levi and Yehuda are brothers who have two other brothers. Yisachar is also to Rachel because of Ereva. Zvulun is also to Leah. But since when Zvulun was born, Rachel had already done Yibum with Levi. So according to Reb Shimon, she's not an Eishes Achshel Lamai.
Right.
And since the flip side is also true when he was born, Leah had already had Yibum with Yehuda. Leah was no longer Eishes Achshel Lamai after Yisachar. So it comes out that Zvulun and Leah are an Ereva of Ashpa, but Zvulun and Rachel are okay.
You could do it.
And here's over here, and
Right.
they're okay. That's the case of Eishes Achshel Lamai that we saw in the Gemara in Daf Tesam Beis. Now, says the Gemara, this only works in Reb Shimon. So Ubeplukta Loi Kamari, we said,
Right.
So the Gemara, so I'm just speaking outside of what the Gemara is about to do. So the Gemara says, Ubeplukta Loi Kamari. So then says the Gemara, by the way, what I just did in the
Is that
Gemara
the end of the
here
page?
takes you almost to the very end.
What's the last line, Sarah?
Ubeplukta Loi Kamari, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from the Mishnah. It says Ubeplukta Loi Kamari. Then we said, V'Rev Safra Metargim Ap Eishes Achiv. The case I just said, and what's the simanim? Meis no levibe, meis no levim, which is literally the order I just did it in. Now the Gemara goes through the case. Reuven v'Shimon nesuin shtei achias, like I said. Levi v'Yehuda nesuin shtei nachrias. Now it's important to understand why they made Levi married to Dina, not a guy, but like another woman.
Yeah.
Let's call her Basia. Yeah. Mace Reuven dies. Nolad Yisachar v'Yibum Levi, and Levi does a Yibum. Now Rachel's also because of Eishes Achshel Lamai to Yisachar, and now Mace Shimon Nolad Zvulun v'Yibum Yehuda, so that now Yehuda's married to Leah, but Zvulun and Leah are Eishes Achshel Lamai. Now Mesu Levi v'Yehuda. Let's say Levi and Yehuda. So who's falling? you have Levi's house has Dinah and Rachel falling, and Yehuda's house has Basya and Leah falling, right? The Gemara says, Mesu Levi Yehuda b'leibanim, v'naflu lo kami Yisachar v'Zvulun, ha'asur l'zeh, muteris l'zeh, v'asur l'zeh, muteris l'zeh. V'achos ha'sheyivim, but this is the case. The Gemara says, one second. Lama li yibem Yehuda. In this case over here, why did Yehuda have to do Yibam to Leah? It's possible that even if Yehuda didn't do Yibam to Leah, you've already established this. When did Zvulun become a problem with Leah? The moment he was born and no one had done Yibam yet. Why does Yehuda need to do Yibam now? Why do we have to make it a case? Why can't you have it that it's not Yehuda and Levi? Why not just say that it's Levi and Shimon? Meaning when Shimon originally died, his wife Leah is Asr to Zvulun, so you can have that case. Meaning the Gemara is just bothered. Why have an extra step? Below Yibim Yehuda Nami Mishkachasla, because you could just have where instead of this being Yehuda, you can just say that that's really coming off of Shimon's death, and who's falling? Leah. So on that, the Gemara answers, and this is why we mentioned Dina and Basya, Mishum Tsar. Because what are we saying? We're saying Achos Shevim to fit the entire Mishnah Daf Beis. The Mishnah Daf Beis mentioned not just the Erev, but also mentioned the Tzara. So Gemara says, therefore I have Yehuda who did Yibam to Leah in order so that now, if let's say, so what's going to happen? So we're saying that Zvulun is allowed to be with Rachel and Yisachar is allowed to be with Leah. But let's say instead of them doing that, they went ahead and now you have the Tzara, right? So who is to Yisachar? Basya is an Erva, a Tzara Serva. And to Zvulun, Dina, Tzara Serva, right? So therefore, that's the Chiddush of the Mishnah to teach you that also. Says the Gemara, Hateinach Tzara, once you're telling me when to fit the whole Mishnah, Tzaras, Tzara, Ma'ikal Meimer. How are you going to explain now the case? Gemara says, you're right. You go into Hadar v'Yibminu, Nami Gad v'Asher, because we're just going to put two more brothers on the board. You have Gad over here, and you have Asher over here. And they have, let's say, their own wives. Gemara keeps on going like that.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
The first time we did it pretty well, so what's so hard now?
Yeah. Honestly, it's
I found the first page was harder than this one.
honestly,
It was harder than this one.
Can I tell you, I was listening in the car yesterday,
Yeah.
and I don't normally listen to the Daf Yomi Shiur because it just messes me up a little, but I do listen to the Surly Boards every once in a while. It's very clear.
Yeah.
But yesterday he hadn't uploaded his Shiur, or maybe 2 days ago he hadn't uploaded his Shiur yet. So I was listening to Rabbi Rosner. It was also very good.
Yeah.
But he's like me, like most people, he tends to focus a ton on Amud Aleph, and then Amud Beis becomes a blur.
Yeah.
But either way, so at the beginning of Daf Chaf Zion, he started either Chav Zion or Chav Ches, I forget. He said something, and I've heard this a lot of his shiur. He's never done this before. He started at the beginning. He's like, I feel like I got to give the Ulam some chizuk. And I was like, well, what's he doing? Yeah, and he said
three bones.
He eventually said that, but he was trying to make the point that, like, I know a lot of people feel like yesterday's daf was too much. It was just too much. And I got a tremendous amount of chizuk from what he was saying. Like to hear someone who you're not even learning with say, yeah, the daf you just did, that was a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
He's like, that's
and
not.
He's a genius.
And he's a super genius. His father is a super genius.
Doesn't matter.
But either way,
Listen, I got it better than you last time.
And honestly, that's the process.